I would be speaking about the challenges, not the importance, the challenges of social, political, and economic stability in sub-Saharan Africa. I want to consider the importance as given. And if it was not given, certainly Dr. Gio has made it so clear that it's all important. But what are these challenges? Some of which he has already very ably identified. The other slight modification, well, not really a modification, but just a matter of my own scope. I would have, Dr. Gio would have put the Sudan, as well as South Sudan, as part of sub-Saharan Africa. But you know, that map you showed at the beginning of your presentation apparently excludes Sudan, and probably along with it, South Sudan from the sub-Saharan map.
Are you sure?
Am I right?
No, it doesn't. It doesn't.
Okay, because you mentioned six North African states.
Yeah.
Well, I recognize five. Which is
I didn't name them. But remember that Sudan is not in the Maghreb, up Maghreb there. There were Egypt, Tunisia, Algeria, Morocco, and Sahara,
and Libya.
Well, yeah, and Libya.
Okay, you can't sorry, okay.
Well, it was and Libya, but Sudan is
by Spain. Yes,
so Sudan is in the.
Yes, okay.
It's in sub-Saharan. Yeah.
Okay, good. That's how I also see it myself. I didn't count the SADRO under occupation by Morocco. Although I would also be inclined to put SADRO in sub-Saharan Africa because it's at the southern side and probably more integrated with us than Guinea. But again, the Arab occupation of North America is several centuries old, and we have got used to considering North Africa as an extension of the Arab world, even though the indigenous people of North Africa are still very much there, the Berbers, but their culture is suppressed everywhere, except perhaps we see a sparkle of it in Tunisia as well as in Algeria. But basically, the Arab culture has come to dominate everybody, and even the indigenous people are also Arabized, as it were. Now, to the topic which the presenters have given us to speak on, I would begin by observing that the twin challenge of sub-Saharan Africa states at independence were very simple. One, national integration. Everybody has talked about how fragile these states are. So national integration was very important, was critical. And then, of course, the other challenge was development. How do you develop this space that the colonialists left very bare? There was nothing, there's no legacy of development that the colonialists left, and how do Africans pick up from there? We made so many false steps, but I want to reflect upon our experience from the prism of these two challenges that we set out with at independence: the challenge of national integration and the challenge of development. Now, the issue of national integration is a little bit obvious because of the problem of state formation in Africa. Everybody knows the story that Africa was carved up more on the map than on the ground. And Europeans were actually contesting for territories that are not physically occupied. Many of them actually are not physically seen them, but they were claiming them basically on the map, and they were drawing boundaries out of convenience between colonial powers. And because the Berlin Treaty recognized that the European powers that are able to occupy, by which it was meant able to establish a claim, a stake in a territory, should be regarded as the power in that territory. What the at least the French and the British did was to obtain agreements. They call them, some were friendship agreements, trade and friendship. Some were protection agreements to obtain them from the native rulers and to stake their claim to the territory based upon these agreements. Now, there's a famous case that everybody remembers, how Captain Lugard, then working for the Royal Niger Company, actually had this famous race to Nikki in the Bogu Kingdom, just to beat the French to it. And he did that. He beat them to it actually by, I think, 2 days, in order to obtain an agreement from the person considered to be the paramount ruler of the Bogu Kingdom. Now, a large part of that kingdom is in Nigeria today. The remaining part is in a neighboring country because France was able to claim part of that territory. The result is that the colonialism had very superficial administrative framework in Africa, particularly among British colonized areas where indirect rule was used mostly. So at the end of colonial rule, what you found that there was inadequate administrative machinery in these territories. Number two, the territories were only integrated on paper. In other words, the people had not come to acquire any new identity. They were still the way they thought they always were, except of course that the traditional rulers have lost some power. But they did not see themselves as any different. They did not see themselves as belonging to a new country. And that identity crisis remains to this day. So the challenge of acquiring this colonial demarcated territory, which arbitrarily demarcated territory, was how to build a nation from these disparate groups. And that was a very big challenge for the successors of the colonial powers. And we saw that in the case of the Congo, for example, the country practically collapsed. We use the term state failure almost immediately after colonialism. And the reason why the others did not follow the same path was because of the approach of the post-independence rulers to concentrate power as much as possible in the center. And so in the pursuit of national integration, you'll find centralization. Unfortunately for all of us, centralization was also superficial and created a lot of resentment. And so you go to Eastern Eastern DRC, even to this day. The rebellions of the 1960s have continued almost uninterrupted. You could say, of course, during the time of the strongman, Mobutu, he was able to put his foot down on some of these areas by sheer brutality. But as soon as the strongman left, all these things came up again, and Eastern DRC is worse than it was actually in the 60s. And you can say that for a lot of Africa. And so that was a challenge of national integration. The approach that was taken wasn't very adequate. And it was more like, if we have effective powers over this, or if we exercise effective powers over this territory, that will be sufficient. Well, that was not quite sufficient. And so what was the consequence of this approach? The consequence was that almost everywhere, we tried to now have presidential system of government. Now there's already the semi-presidential in the Francophone areas, but in the Anglophone areas, where you had a different system, the Westminster system of parliament, and the prime minister accountable to parliament, almost everywhere in the Anglophone Africa, this was swept away by either presidentialism or by military rule, never to be restored. And so we'll look at a country like Botswana, a country like Lesotho, as maybe Seychelles, I don't know, as probably the remnants of a system that was existing previously, which was annulled in the pursuit of national integration. So there was this constitutional power. Constitutional power also resulted in personalizing power. So you now have this, either you have a strong man or you have a big man politics. So almost everywhere in Africa, you find that there was this post-independence ruler who was going to rule perpetually. There were no term limits. And in order to rule perpetually, he had to become authoritarian. He suppressed the opposition. And so the countries that had multi-party system at the beginning of nationhood, almost all lost that to one party system or to military rule, as in the case of Nigeria. So there was this constitutional power that followed, and that legacy, even though it's not exactly with us anymore, but there are some aspects which continue to reflect upon us, even now. For example, now it is true that multi-partyism has returned to most of Africa. It's even true as well that you will have in many countries competitive elections, and you actually have transitions in some of these countries. But what you find in these countries is the same authoritarian streak persists. Now, the professor who standard in Uganda just told us about the fact that the president of President Museveni makes an announcement and the country is shut down without notice. Yeah, Museveni just won an election in inverted commas. And so he could call himself an elected leader. But it's exactly the same guy he was in 1986 or thereabout when he took power, in terms of strongman kind of politics. And you could name Museveni's all around Africa. Even a country like Kenya, that is operating a democratic constitution, and in many ways, Kenya has democratized. But we still find, surprisingly or interestingly, that President Uhuru Kenyatta sometimes is brazenly authoritarian. I mean, for example, refused to swear in judges because a judge that was promoted to the Supreme Court was a judge that gave a judgment against him, and so he will not accept swearing. He delayed swearing the Chief Justice, and so on and so forth. A court announced the constitutional amendment, which is being processed by the president for very self-serving. The amendment is for self-serving purposes, to amend the constitution in order for Kenyatta and his old foe to be able to for the old foe to take over from Kenyatta. That's you just revise the constitution for that purpose. So we find this example again and again. Of course, we find numerous examples of that in our country as well. Nigeria approaching what is otherwise supposed to be democratic constitution, and the head of state is authoritarian in many ways. So that is a legacy that comes from the problem of state formation, or the process of state formation, which is the legacy of statehood, and the problem that Professor Owusu said that we urgently have to solve. Now, I could add to that things like, I think I've already mentioned that the African political parties tend to be centralized. They tend to be centralized, and as the American political scientist William Riker pointed out, where you have centralized political parties, the country tends to be unitary. But when you have decentralized political parties, the country tends to be federal. And so it accounts for American federalism, partially because American political parties are highly decentralized. So you don't have a national chairman of the Republican Party in America issuing orders to the state party. No, on the contrary, it is state parties that coalesce in order to create a national ticket or whatever. And of course, to win election, it's also the state party that does that. But in Nigeria, it's PDP, APC at the national level. Everybody saw what happened when a former governor of Edo State was made chairman of APC. I mean, it's like if you just made him a dictator, that's how the party is run. And so even to this day, you have local branches conduct elections, and you hear that that's party elections, and you just hear that the national executive or the national chairman has just cancelled it. So it is centralized. And this is what again happens everywhere. It's even the ANC in South Africa is as well centralized. So in this kind of centralized system, the power tends to be concentrated at the center. It doesn't matter whether you have many parties or not. It's just that the party system is centralized. The other challenge, let me be conscious of time. The other challenge that I mentioned is that of development. And Dr. Gyo has already, I think, dealt with this very well. He said that the GDP, the combined GDP of sub-Saharan Africa is about the GDP of Spain. And Spain is a medium economy in Europe. And what I didn't hear him say, but I saw it in the slide, is that the value of the remittances annually to Africa, to sub-Saharan Africa, is about the value of the GDP of sub-Saharan Africa, and that is remarkable. That is remarkable. He has given reasons why this is the case, including the fact that we are a produce economy. We depend on commodity export, which is what we were doing in colonial times. And that was the whole base of the colonial economy, which has persisted. And we don't add value at all. You can imagine that cocoa would be much more valuable to the economy of Cote d'Ivoire if much of it was processed into chocolate, for example, instead of chocolate to process in Switzerland. Oil will be much more valuable to Nigerian economy if we had that effective system of producing petrol, petrochemicals, fertilizer, and all those other kind of stuff, which happily the Dangote refinery will be doing just that. We're thankful. But imagine one guy alone sets up this refinery that will process about 1/3 of the entire daily output of Nigeria's oil. So what if we have 2 of that? That will be 2/3 of Nigeria's output. That will be remarkable. But forever, we didn't do that. And even when we have these refineries, government-owned refineries, somehow they don't survive. I mean, you could say they are poorly maintained. We don't have turnaround maintenance regularly and so on and so forth. But there are others who say, and I can't vouch for this, but there are others who say that these refineries can never work anyway, because those that import petrol, import diesel, import kerosene, will not allow you to work because of the phenomenal profit they make from doing that, and the profit that impoverishes the country. So we have so many approaches to development, and one of the approaches was the notion of, or the idea of, a development plan. And we wanted a planned economy, which was very much in vogue in the 1960s, and even to the early part of the 70s, we could plan, and our development will be assured after a few rounds of development plans. That did not work. And the reason why that did not work is partly because of the fact that our economies are very susceptible to external shocks. And why is that so? Because we export mainly primary produce. We're either exporting cocoa or we're exporting minerals, unprocessed. And as the market fluctuates for these products, our economy suffers violently because of the large proportion dependence of the economy on these resources. This morning, I think this morning in Canada time, the Minister of Finance, the Nigerian Minister of Finance was on BBC, interviewed on Hard Talk, and this economy issue came up. She's very hopeful that our dependence on petroleum has reduced. Certainly, it has reduced as per the share of our GDP. It has even reduced as per the share of government revenues. But it has not reduced at all in terms of foreign exchange earnings for the country. And so any shock in the market is going to cause hyperinflation in our country, as we've seen. We've just seen the Naira lose half of its value in a period of a couple of months because of the pressure on our foreign exchange. First of all, I think that African countries should move out of this part dependence paradigm. This is the World Bank. This is the World Bank model. This is the IMF model. This is the Singapore model, and so on and so forth. We should move out of this part dependence paradigm to think out of the box, to create our independent approaches, which of course will benefit from the experience of other countries. Secondly, I also think that what I call the citizenship question, some have called it the national question, ought to be addressed. There are many suggestions about this. But what is important is that the citizen who is mostly alienated today from the system has to be able to identify with the system. And one way to do that is to improve representation, to give voice, and so on and so forth. That may also involve devolution of power, and decentralization is very important. To decentralize, whether you are having a federal state or a unitary state, to decentralize is very important because it gives voice to the segments of the country. Then, of course, strong institutions, judicial independence of the central bank, at least in macroeconomic policy. There should be interference by the government. The government should be confined to fiscal policy. Let the central bank deal with monetary policy. Accountability is all important. A rule-based system is key to overcoming many of the challenges that we face. You can call this rule of law, but it goes beyond the rule of law. Let us add to it the spirit of the rule of law as well. And then finally, we have to deal with the question of corruption. It is the monster in the room. It has been called state capture in its most egregious form. And I think that state capture is not just only in South Africa, where there's a Commission on State Capture sitting right now, but is present in practically every African country, maybe with the exception of Botswana, perhaps. But everywhere else, you find whether Angola, Equatorial Guinea, Nigeria, Kenya, and so on and so forth, there is state capture, and that is a threat to our getting economic sustainability. Thank you.